Welcome to Conversations with Contemplatives. Today we're going to be speaking with Lama Karma Justin Wall. Lama Karma graduated with honors from Columbia University with degrees in English literature and religious studies. He completed 2 3-year retreats at Chuling Monastery in New York, the second of which from 2007 to 2011 was sponsored by Sutter Foundation. As well as 2 3-year retreats, Lama Karma completed an additional 6-month retreat at Carmeling in France, including extensive dark retreat. He has also completed a year-long certification course in mindfulness facilitation through the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center at UCLA. Lama Karma has been teaching since 2007. He is the spiritual director of the Milarepa Retreat Center in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee and founded the Echo Dharma Earth Vase Pilgrimage Project in the Smoky Mountains and Blue Ridge Mountain region. He is also a founding board member of the Lotus Light Contemplative Community Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. He currently divides his time between Tennessee and Woodstock, New York, where he helps the Middle Way School, an experimental Buddhist grade school operated by the Chensi Foundation. He is also the lead designer and facilitator for Anuma, a company offering ceremonial group experiences to terminally ill patients and their families in virtual reality. Lama Karma also happens to be married and has a daughter. Lama Karma, welcome. Nice to have this chance to speak to you.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're looking at your bio. It seems the beginning reflects what a lot of modern students do, is to begin in academia, in searching out kind of further studies in Buddhism. So tell us a little bit about your pre-retreat life, how you kind of became interested in Buddhism, and when and how you heard about the 3-year retreat, and how that became a hook for you, leading you to get into 3-year retreat.
Sure. Yeah. So I was at Columbia in New York City. And I was studying mainly literary theory, so English literature, and focusing on literary theory. And it was all because of a really burning question that was existential on a certain level of like, why anything? Why do this? Why are we doing any of this? And who knows what? And all the normal questions that I think a lot of people ask at that age. And because I couldn't find any satisfactory answers, I was pretty in a state of despair. You know, I was really searching and had a lot of, it was almost a confirmed type of depression, because there's something in me that knew there should be something to strive for, something to realize, you might say. And I couldn't find it. And there wasn't anyone really that was helping me to do that either. But then I found eventually through beginning studies in religion as well, starting to zero in on how does basically the 2 truths, what you find in Buddhism, how does all of this relativity and the way that we understand reality in that way jive with being a good person and actually treating people with kindness and so forth. And I found those answers as I dug deeper, especially with the help of Bob Thurman in Madhyamaka, in Buddhist philosophy. And so I can say that Madhyamaka saved my life in a certain way, because I was basically killing myself slowly with hedonism and, the way of living that a lot of people have in college, right? And so when I found that, then there was something that was really liberated, intellectually at least. I didn't have any doubts anymore about that. The kind of affliction of doubt was really healed in a sense, but it didn't translate, into my heart, into my emotional reality. And as you can read everywhere in Buddhist philosophical texts, unlike in many Western philosophical texts, there's always an exhortation to actually make it real, to practice. And so that propelled me, the disconnect between, you might say, my brain and my heart, propelled me into looking for practice. I did a little bit in college, but then right when I got out, I did a Goenka Vipassana retreat. And then suddenly it was like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to devote my life, my time to. And it was very deeply transformational. And of course, it started to fade a few weeks after, but the certainty that I was on the right path or going in the right direction was there. And then I went to India and Nepal, and because of what I had studied previously, um, honing in on the Tibetan tradition in particular, because of how accessible it was in terms of teachers and it being a living mystical tradition in many ways, living lineage. I really honed in on that. And of course, within that, it's not hard to find the example of the 3 retreat being something to do. And in my mind, that was the best thing, the main thing to do, to look for. So I went on this kind of idealistic pilgrimage to find my teacher and find a retreat to join, to jump into, and just get it all taken care of as soon as I could. Right? But I wound up coming all the way back to New York, and on the recommendation of a friend that I had been traveling with, found Tipton Choling, which was offering a 3 retreat in 2 months' time from when I connected to them. And then I went there and I met Lama Norla Rinpoche, and he welcomed me and said, jump in. And so I did. And I had no idea that that wasn't or isn't the proper, or I guess best way of doing such a thing. But for me, it didn't really matter at that point. It was almost like if I didn't do that, then there was no point in anything for me. So there's a lot to say about what kind of advice to give someone who's looking to do such a thing. And I wouldn't recommend replicating what I did, but that is what happened, and hopefully it worked out. It remains to be seen, I guess. But I have no regrets, and so that's the short of it.
Yeah, generally we say that it's good to be very familiar with the teachers of the retreat and the retreat situation, and to be planning for some time, to prepare for some time before going into retreat. But as you say, it seems to have worked out for you. You got to know the teacher as you went through the retreat. So talk a little bit about the retreat. So that was in the Kaiju or Shamba retreat traditions. So it was men and women cloistered separately. So talk a little bit about the retreat situation and what life in retreat was like, the daily schedule, the practice schedule, how that was for you.
Sure. So the first retreat, as you said, there's 2 retreat centers, and a lot of this, most of it was really modeled on what the previous Kala Rinpoche had developed for Westerners, which you were the first to participate in. So it was very much replicating that model, where there's 2 drupkongs, 2 houses, retreat centers with I think there's about 10 rooms in each of them, 1 for men, 1 for women. And it's very much in a monastic context, and in this case, very much in the Karma Kaju and Shangpa Kaju lineages, so Dakshang Kaju, with, of course, a lot of Nyingma practices sprinkled in, as is usual for the Karma Kaju. And it being a monastic situation, and everyone takes temporary ordination for the duration of the retreat, and wears monks and or monastic clothing, robes. And the schedule is very circumscribed, defined. You're supposed to wake up at a little bit before 4. I would generally wake up before that. And then you have a first session that lasts about 2 hours. Then you have a group session, that group chanting and ritual, all of which is in Tibetan, for about 2 hours. And then a short breakfast, and another session alone in your room until lunchtime. And then there's a 2-hour break in the middle of the day, where you have to pack everything in that you want to do for yourself. It includes showering and cleaning anything, laundry, cleaning the house, doing whatever chores. It's very writing letters, this kind of thing. Very, very minimal private time, basically. And then you jump back into another session in the afternoon in your own room, and then another group chanting session in the evening, and then a final session in one's room, and then you go to bed around 9:30 or so. So that's the sort of full cycle of the day, and it's very demanding. And then you're in a meditation box, so you're doing all of your practice and also sleeping at night in a box, which is not closed. It's sort of open on the top, and it has three sides that are lower, and then one side in the back has a backrest. And for me, I kind of like nuzzled in the corner of it and figured out how to rest. But the idea is that it's you develop a continuity of practice and presence, and it's pretty heavy-handed. You know, it's a very effort-oriented approach in general. And I know there are different models of how to spend 3 years practicing, but in this way, it's almost like the mentality is everyone's going to be wasting time, so we need to squeeze them as much as possible so they waste the least amount of time. And for me, that was very good. That was really helpful. And I was young and had a lot of energy to just kind of throw at practice, which, over the years wore off, wore down, and backfired eventually, which is important. But for me at that time, it was really, again, life-saving, and I never had any second thoughts, especially the first retreat. But yeah, that's a little bit of a portrait. And then you're in there I was with 5 other men.
Okay. Yeah. And then, so when you came out of retreat, you decided to do a second retreat. Did that happen fairly soon after your first retreat?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I still had a lot of energy and knew that I was going to get into trouble as soon as I emerged. And so part of me was really excited about that, and part of me was dreading that. And the better half of me, maybe the better half, was really actively internally asking my teacher to catch me, to whatever might happen, that I don't spin out too much irrevocably. And in some way, I suppose he heard that. And when I got out of retreat, well, the first thing we did is come on a bus tour dancing Tibetan Cham to all the affiliated centers. And we came here to Tennessee, and I was introduced to this land and the people here, and that really touched my heart and was very affirming. But almost immediately, we went to Tibet and Nepal and India to create a movie of Lama Norla's life story. And so I was right next to him the whole time. And in the middle of that, was the summer after the spring that we emerged. In the middle of that, I was just like, I'm not done. I feel like half baked bread, just kind of like being very sensitive in the world, but not having the resilience to actually practice, what I had been doing in a more closed environment, and just felt like I needed to go back in. And I asked him about that, and he agreed. And so yeah, I went back in the following fall.
And you mentioned that to me in previous conversations, you mentioned that you've always been very interested in the Nyingma tradition. And so you were able to adapt your program in the second retreat.
Yeah, and there are a lot of funny anecdotes. One, when I was in Manjukatila, which is in the Tibetan sector of Delhi in India, on that trip with Lama Norla, I was corresponding by email with the director of Pema Osaling, so another Nyingma retreat center, 3 retreat center in California, asking them if they would let me go into their retreat. And they were like, yeah, you're about to go in, you're ready to join. And then I walked out of the internet cafe, and Lama Norla was just standing in the middle of the road staring at me. And I was like, okay, never mind. And so, I just kept going with what I had started. But I did ask him, to be able to do a more Nyingma um, curriculum based more on the teachings of Guru Rinpoche.
Mhm.
Mm.
Nice. And so with a lot of people, I mean, the retreat, is its own challenge, but a lot of people find one of the most challenging aspects is coming out of retreat. So coming out of your second retreat, you said you already were a bit apprehensive about your wild nature. So how did that happen for you?
Yeah, I managed to, I don't know, maybe grow up, hopefully, during that second retreat. And a lot of it, I think, was relative to what I shared before, recognizing on some level that a lot of the energy, the motivation that I was putting into practice, that effort-oriented approach, was really harboring an unconscious um, aggression, basically, towards myself. That there was a part of myself that was not acceptable, not good enough, was imperfect, and needed to be improved in some way. And the realization that that kind of ulterior motive was not dominant, but was there, at the same time as I hit a wall with practice in terms of doing the yogas. I was doing a lot of intensive drill course of physical yogas, on all my free time, just using every moment I could to do more of that, and basically destroyed my knee and couldn't walk anymore after a certain point. And so then everything, the whole house of cards kind of fell apart, and that realization of, that motivation came to the fore, and I had to really reorient, what I was doing, who I was, and why I was in retreat. And a much softer side came out, and an opportunity for acceptance emerged that really lasted for a number of years, maybe even till now. That realization that, that's not the right way of going about it, and trying to develop genuine bodhicitta, genuine motivation for practice. So by the time the end of the retreat came, I was already ready to go on to the next thing. And I was ready to emerge, and I was eager, and I had in mind coming here to this land to build a stupa, to create a retreat center, to be with other people in relationship, to really be on and in the land, using my hands, my body, relating with the earth, and developing all the aspects of the person that a retreat doesn't generally touch. And then a huge part of that is relationship. Of course, in retreat, you're with other, in this model, you're with other men. And so you do a lot of work in that way, but relating, at least as a heterosexual male to the other female, was, starting from square one. But inevitably, that blind spot became, the main thing. And my partner, who was also in the women's 3 retreat, we both came out together and came here. And then relationship was and has been until now the primary practice. And so, yeah, so that's kind of brings us back to the present. So kind of where I'm at.
There's two things, that you made me think about. One is that something I've noticed very often is the connections that happen when we first step out of retreat. You mentioned coming to Tennessee after your first retreat and feeling the connection. And I look back at my own life and many other retreat graduates I've spoken to, the aspirations and the connections that are made in that magic period of just coming out of retreat often create pathways that determine a large part of our later life.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And the other thing that I think is really valuable that you're sharing is particularly coming out of a kaiju kind of monastic chauvinist environment, is the importance of relationship and exploring relationships, and the extent to which Vajrayana really is intending to prepare us to make every situation, every moment of life, to embrace life and make that all the practice. So that sounds really interesting. So after your second retreat, you came back to Tennessee fairly quickly.
We went to India again with the next group of retreatants. We came here pretty quickly, but then a few months after that, went on a pilgrimage in India. And then the following winter came here to stay. Yeah. Yeah, and there was nothing. So starting from scratch, basically on the land.
So you're sitting on the land now. That's what we see behind you.
Yeah. This is part of the land, the Dharma land. So we're building a stupa, and yeah, we have retreat facilities.
So you and I have spoken on a number of occasions, and I know that you're also kind of very keen and interested in kind of understanding both the respecting tradition and where that's appropriate, but also how to adapt and make this pathway accessible to the modern world. And you're always involved in interesting projects. I mean, there's the ecological side, then there's the virtual reality side. So do you want to talk about some of your projects and some of your ideas and some of the challenges you see that lie ahead?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, and especially you and I have joked about how retreat, and I remember Sarah Harding saying something similar. It's a very, very rigorous, thorough training that prepares you for basically nothing, or everything, depending how you look at it. So you've invested so much, but in terms of the credentials that you can show to the outside world, you generally have to make a case for it. So at a certain point, I needed to leave the land and enter into a normal life, and that happened a few different times. And exiting the bubble, the protective bubble, whether it's a monastery or a retreat center, and actually fully entering society can be very challenging, psychologically, financially, everything, emotionally. And I've gone through several cycles of that. And the first time it was like, how do I make the most of the teachings, practices that I've received and offer them? And so that's the whole mindfulness thing that I went into, and went to UCLA and was really grateful for that, and just started teaching in, the word secular is problematic, but just being able to relate the Dharma in a language that's not couched in any culture or dogma, using and talking about the mind and being able to relate teachings on the mind to anyone, regardless of their background, and being able to speak to them according to their disposition and understanding, was, of course, a wonderful thing to learn to do, but also was a job. And so that's how I made, and for anyone looking to do a deep dive, wondering how to make use of it, there's a lot of potential for actually being able to share the wealth of the Dharma outside of a traditional context. So I've done a lot of work with that. And then on the ecological side, the main thing that I came here to do is build a stupa. And we're in the middle of the Bible Belt, and we're in an area that not only do most people not understand what the Dharma is about, but most Buddhists don't really understand what a stupa is about. And that was my main commitment to my teachers, to build the stupa. And I could drum it up, and we could fetishize it and make it seem like a good thing to do, but the intuitive connection of, like, why is this a good thing, why is it helpful for the earth, the community, how does it tie into the Dharma, a lot of this is missing in a lot of people's understanding. So we developed a program to go hiking, basically, in the mountains around here, the Smoky Mountains, on the Appalachian Trail, and also into the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, and visit the sacred sites, which are many, but the knowledge of them has mostly been lost because the indigenous populations and the mythology that they spoke has in large part been lost. So trying to rediscover the sacredness of the land and at the same time doing ritual, both like fire, puja, aspects of that the Tibetan tradition offers in terms of relating with the unseen world, and then also burying treasure vases in the earth as a gift to the earth to balance the environment, to the elements of the environment, and to give back in some way, and creating a network of pilgrimage places throughout the Smoky Mountains that people can then go back to as part of a journey, as part of a practice. And so we created this whole thing called Earth Face Pilgrimage. And that really made it very clear what it's like to, what it means to give back to the earth, and what a stupa is really, how it's functioning on a certain level. And so that's been a really wonderful project that we've been doing, planted over 25 to 30 vases in different mountain peaks and waterfalls and different areas. So that's been really wonderful. And we're still building the stupa, but getting close to finishing. Um, yeah. So then at a certain point, I had a daughter, which has been a real blessing. My wife and I decided to have a daughter or have a child. And after a few years, we were like, oh, wait, we can't just live in the middle of the jungle. We actually need friends and a school and so forth. So we have been, over the years, coming back and forth to upstate New York and the Hudson Valley, where the monastery that I trained at is, and have been working with the Middle Way School there, which is a really amazing pilot program for childhood education in a Buddhist model, Buddhist inspired an environment of Dharma for children. And that was all great, but I still couldn't survive doing the Lama gig outside of my little bubble here. And so in collaboration with a childhood friend of mine, have been developing experiences in virtual reality. The first one was a contemplative experience, really trying to see what the limits of the medium were for genuine practice, genuine Dharma practice, and having a lot of success in that. And in that, a lot of people having intimations of death, a lot of um, encountering their own mortality, somatic experiences of dissolution, and things like that. So at a certain point, we pivoted to focus on death as a practice and end of life care. And so right now, we're in the middle of doing a lot of tests and a study on showing how the program that we've developed is beneficial for people and their families who are facing a terminal diagnosis. And so I do that work as well.
Is that a product that is commercially available at this point, or is still under development?
It's available, but it needs a facilitator. So you can download the app and sort of do a tutorial, but it needs a live facilitator to be in the environment and create and hold the space for it to actually happen. But yeah, we do a lot of demos, and people are welcome to reach out if they're interested in that.
Uh-huh. And you mentioned, I mean, what you were just talking about now made me think back to your experience in dark retreat.
Yeah.
There must be maybe some similarities between the dark retreat experience and the virtual reality work you're doing.
For sure. Yeah, so in it was 2015, I had my Aaron Rodgers moment where I traveled to Peru for the first time to do an ayahuasca dieta with a close Dharma friend. And that was its own story. And that is also something that a lot of Vajrayana folks are in different ways interacting with. And then right after that, a month after that, I went to France to begin what was intended to be a 3-year retreat that would be on and off, and I would be helping with the 3-year retreat that was entering at that point, coming and going over a period of 3 years to teach and then also do my own retreat. But at Carmeling, they have a really wonderful dark retreat facility, and I wanted to take advantage of that as much as possible. And so ended up doing spending a lot of time in dark retreat during that 6 months. And for sure, whether it was the crossover between the ayahuasca experiences and dark retreat was very direct. Just the bare simplicity of mind, just without any content. Even even you may think of dark retreat as something that generates a lot of visual experiences. Ayahuasca, the same thing, but really for me it was about peeling away and letting go and just resting in a very naked, basic awareness. And that experience eventually translated also very directly into the virtual environment that we've created. That is, you're just in space, and there's no ground, and it's very minimalistic, very little stimuli, and very figurative lighting coming and going in different ways. So yeah, there's a continuity there between all of those.
So what would you say to people who might be thinking about 3-year retreat or different long retreats, or kind of the modern world is moving faster and faster and our attention span is shorter and shorter, and people in that sense are more and more estranged from the depth experience, where authenticity really seems to reside. So what reflections might you have to offer?
Yeah, and there's different, at least in my experience, there's different ways of going about it. There's what I would say is the best way is, even independent of the question of 3-year retreat, is being in relationship with a genuine realized master. That's the primary thing, that you develop that relationship, and within that relationship, whatever happens, and then that may be, in my case, the 3-year retreat was the main thing for Lama. It was just like his life's work was to do that as much as possible, offer that to as many people as possible, in the way that he had been exposed. And so that's what I did. That's not always the case, and other teachers have different models. So getting rid of the preconception that the 3-year retreat is the thing to do, that I had, and of course that's what I found, since I had that preconception, but really understanding that the relationship with the teacher is the main thing, and that teacher might not even be living, and then what? But that relationship is the first thing. But that's not always possible, right? And especially nowadays, because a lot of our teachers are not accessible in that personal way also. Then understanding that there are many different ways of going about intensive practice. And for someone who is interested in 3-year retreat, you really have to ask yourself, are you doing this because you want to be exposed to a tradition and to learn that tradition, learn the language, the culture, the way of doing ritual, and the whole cultural inheritance of that, in addition to a spiritual yearning, longing, and path? Or do you just want to develop and inquire into your own spiritual journey? Because those are different things, and sometimes I find there's confusion about that. People expecting to find their tailor-made spiritual journey in a 3-year retreat, and instead realizing that they have to become anthropologists and learn a language and learn a culture and relate with teachers who are from another culture and all of that. And on the flip side, sometimes that's perfect. Either it's what you want, or because it's what rubs you the wrong way, it's good for you. You can't say. You just can't say. The main thing is really the motivation that you, again and again, like I shared with my own story, we all harbor these ulterior motives that we're not even aware of. So continually coming back to bodhicitta again and again, and recognizing that self-deception will be there, and that you're the main thing is to uncover that self-deception and develop that motivation on a more and more authentic level. Then it will come, what the circumstances that will develop that, affirm that, will come. And so putting that first, so whether or not you have a relationship with a teacher, everyone can do that work. And then encountering and having discernment about the different opportunities that might arise that resonate or don't, with that basic motivation. And then, just logistically, there's, doing a 3-year retreat over a period of 10 years is one model. Doing it over a period of 6 years is another model. Coming in and out to emphasize integration so that there's not so much whiplash, I think is probably a good thing for most people. Integrating, we can fool ourselves either way. We can fool ourselves by saying, I'm diving in with full commitment, and therefore what I'm doing is the best, the real, the most authentic thing. We can fool ourselves in that way. We can also fool ourselves by saying, well, I'm just going to touch in a little bit over time, and that will be enough. Oftentimes that allows us to evade and sidestep the full impact of whatever practice might be challenging our ego, our deepest held beliefs. So there's no way to know, and that's why we really need a guide to be able to say, okay, focus for this amount of time, a year or 3 years or a month, whatever it might be. And now try to integrate that, then come back again, and coming back and forth. So that kind of more spacious and gentle approach, I think, would probably be more skillful for most of us in our culture at this time. But again, it's so hard to say.
Well, this has really been rich and delightful. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your insights. And we'll always be curious to see what new adventures you get up to.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, well,
thank you very much, Karma. It's been a great.
It's been so good to have the relationship with you since I think I reached out to you when I was in India and met Taisitro Rinpoche for the first time, and I knew I wanted to do retreat, but I didn't know how. And Sadra wasn't even offering their scholarships yet. I had to get into somehow figure out how to connect with you, and then we developed a really wonderful correspondence and relationship since then. So I've always been really grateful for that.
Look forward to continuing. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Lama.